Thank you. Thank you very much. We're going to hear in a little bit from the congressman. I want to tell you a little bit before we do that. You know, not long ago, an apparently reasonable, well-meaning woman said to me, "Since when does everything in this country always have to be about race?" And I took a step back and a deep breath and I said, since 1619? Which reminds me of the quote I mentioned from John Lewis: if you don't know what happened behind you, you've got no idea what's happening around you. 9/11 we never forget, but this country has never learned, much less forgotten, the truth of our terrorism against Black Americans. America may not be unique in its failings, but we may be in the degree of our denial. There has never been truth and reconciliation. We have never faced our true history, and until we do, we can't overcome it. And that's one of the many reasons why I'm so happy that we're here honoring Congressman John Lewis. Congressman Lewis brings alive what happened behind us. His work as an architect and a builder of the American Civil Rights Movement is extraordinary. You know, it's almost like John Lewis is like the Forrest Gump of the movement. You pick any seminal milestone in civil rights, and there's John Lewis. He's right in the middle of it. 1954, of course, was Brown versus Board of Education. In 1956, Autherine Lucy was the first African American ever admitted to the University of Alabama, and then promptly expelled after riots for her safety. The very next year, young John Lewis started at a Baptist theological seminary for Black ministerial students. But they wouldn't let him open the chapter of the NAACP he wanted to open, probably because they got pushback from their white Baptist supporters. And so he proceeded to transfer or apply to transfer to Troy State University in Alabama, which had never admitted a black student. Of course, he never heard back from them. So he did what all of us would do. He wrote a letter to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And next thing he knew, he's on his way to meet with Dr. King and Ralph Abernathy about desegregating Troy State University, right at the vanguard. Now that they got very close, but it didn't come to pass. But that was just the beginning of John Lewis's path. The very next year, he was immersing himself in principles of nonviolent direct action, working with the great James Lawson, and learning about James Lawson and Dr. King's concept of the beloved community. And the next year after that, he was working on those principles in meetings every week, weekly. He was doing that kind of work that James Lawson and Dr. King became famous for. And then at that same year, which was 1959, he was in a retreat at the Highlander Folk School, which I'm sure many of you have heard of, which was where everybody who was anybody in the civil rights movement made a pilgrimage to, from Dr. King to Stokely Carmichael, and which was, this year in 2019, badly burned and a white supremacist symbol found in the parking lot. This year. The very next year, he was in weekly meetings with the Nashville Student Movement. And the very next year, he was at the vanguard of integrating lunch counters. I bet a lot of folks didn't know that. He was with the Nashville Student Movement. Sit-ins, protests, integrating lunch counters, movie theaters, and stores. Thurgood Marshall came to speak to those students for what they were doing. Dr. King came to speak to those students, and he said, "I came to Nashville not to bring inspiration, but to gain inspiration from the great movement that has taken place in this community. That movement was John Lewis, but he was just getting started. The next year, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was created in 1960. And the very next year, in 1961, John Lewis, 21 years old, was working with CORE as one of the original 13 Freedom Riders, integrating public transportation in this country. And subjecting themselves to the horrors and the trauma and the hate that they experienced. You know, a lot of those Freedom Riders wrote out their wills before they started because they knew what was coming. And it was worse than what they expected. By 1963, John Lewis was chairman of SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And that same year, of course, he was one of the Big Six who orchestrated and organized the Great March on Washington. And only a year after that, 1964, John Lewis, as chair of SNCC, implemented maybe the most powerful moment in the civil rights movement, the Mississippi Freedom Summer, that campaign to register voters in Mississippi that changed the landscape. And 1965, 1 year later, of course, was Selma, about which you all know, and which I'd like to quote a perhaps unlikely source, President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who recognized that Selma was, quote, a turning point in man's unending search for freedom. And he went on to say, and should we defeat every enemy, should we double our wealth and conquer the stars and still be unequal to this issue, then we will have failed as a people and as a nation. And we know that painfully we have not been equal to that issue. As chair of the ABA Civil Rights and Social Justice section, I've devoted this year to a hard look at the truth that Black Americans have been forced to build a country from which they have been systematically excluded and are still systematically excluded. And the overwhelming, cumulative, and enduring effect of slavery and 4 centuries of racism, trauma, and terrorism. We started in the fall, near where John Lewis was born and where he made history, in Birmingham, Montgomery, and Selma, Alabama. And then we moved in the spring to the great and historic and recently denigrated city of Baltimore, Maryland, where we were in the company of another hero of ours, Congressman Elijah Cummings. Now we're here. But it's very important to say that our focus tonight and this year is not an exercise in nostalgia. I could say a lot more about John Lewis's past work, but I'm not going to. I could talk about his many accomplishments, including being the driving force, legislative force, in creating the National African American Museum of Culture and History, but I'm not going to. I could talk about his many awards, but I'm not going to. I could talk about all the famous people he's known. I could even joke about the fact that he was presented the film that won the Best Picture this last year, but I'm not going to talk about that either. I could certainly talk about his legislative accomplishments. This man is known as the conscience of Congress, something that resonates with us in the ABA because our civil rights section is known as the conscience of the ABA. But I'm not even going to talk about that. I'm going to talk about why John Robert Lewis matters right now and how important he is right now, and the true character of a man who literally when he was barely out of his teens, put his life on the line for freedom, and who is still standing up and speaking out right now, today. You know, Dr. King said, you're going to die. You got no choice over when or where or how. The only choice you have is what you're going to give your life for. John Lewis made that choice. He made it early, he made it often, he made it dangerously, and he made it right. He made it for justice, he made it for freedom, he made it for equality. John Lewis was the first African-American conscientious objector in the history of Alabama to the war in Vietnam. But John Lewis shed blood over and over again for racial justice. He went to jail over 40 times. He spent a month in Parchment Farms, maybe the worst prison in the country. So that's why we're here honoring him tonight. He's still making that choice every day. He's still making that right choice. At 80 years old, he's still making that choice. And here I have to digress for just a moment for a point of personal privilege, because honoring John Lewis is personal to me. When I was nominated to be chair of this section 4 years ago, I knew I wanted to honor John Lewis, the first non-lawyer we've ever honored. Last month, you heard a presidential candidate of ours bring up another candidate up short by saying there was a little girl in California who was part of the second class to integrate her public schools. I was in the first class to integrate those schools. I grew up right across the bay in Oakland. I was born in Oakland. I grew up in Berkeley, the first city in the nation to voluntarily integrate its schools. When Dr. King heard of that plan, he said, "Hope is restored to my heart and spirit" by that plan to integrate the Berkeley schools. The school population at that time was 50% white and 42% black. I was bused to a predominantly black school. And apart from meeting my beautiful wife and having my beautiful children, that was about the best thing that ever happened to me. Busing, of course, is a white euphemism to allow people to pretend that they're not objecting to integration, just to the inconvenience of busing. It's kind of like saying, it's the educational equivalent of saying, the Civil War was about states' rights, not slavery. But we know the truth. People have been bused since the 1920s. Ask John Lewis. John Lewis was bused for 2 hours to his black school in Alabama. And even in Berkeley, the enlightened city of Berkeley, integration didn't happen without a fight and without white flight. But I was lucky. I was lucky that I went to that school, and I was lucky with what I brought with me to that school. My mother was a member of an organization John Lewis knows well and worked with, the American Friends Service Committee. One of my older brothers was right alongside John Lewis as a freedom rider. So I gained from integration, I had the benefit of empathetically understanding a little bit of what it's like to be in a numerical minority, but at the same time, understanding from my school friends and from my family the incredible advantage I have for being in a societal majority. And we are here tonight to look deeply and with clear eyes at that advantage and at the pervasive, insidious racism in today's America. The racism sown into our system and into ourselves. I could say bias because it makes us all more comfortable, but we're not here to make you or anybody else comfortable. John Lewis tells us it's good to make good trouble. And that's what we're trying to do, make good trouble. Slavery and the Civil War are right here in this room with us tonight. Painfully, we have not overcome. We have proven unequal to that effort. And so, in President Johnson's own words, we have failed as a nation. That's why John Lewis and honoring him is so important right now, because he's speaking out. Amidst this Groundhog Day, post-Reconstruction, dystopian twilight zone in which we live. When ideas from the white supremacist playbook we're suddenly hearing every day, when race baiting is back mainstream, we need John Lewis more than ever. The Voting Rights Act that just celebrated its 54th anniversary and that John Lewis shed blood for, eviscerated. Black wealth in this country is 5% of white wealth. Why are we outraged? I mean, wouldn't you be? If someone came to you and took 95% of what you have away, you'd be outraged. We are rightly outraged and horrified by the mass shootings in this country. But where is the outrage over the ongoing and daily mass killing of young black Americans? This is the 65th anniversary of Brown versus Board of Education, maybe one of the most seminal and settled Supreme Court cases in the canon. And yet we have right now 30 court appointees who refuse to say that Brown was correctly decided. We need John Lewis's mighty voice now more than ever to inspire us forward. And I'm going to give you a couple examples why and how he's using it right now. You all remember the House Oversight Committee hearings with Michael Cohen, right? And you remember that Representative Meadows trotted out a black political appointee to try to show that the administration is not racist. And Representative Tlaib said, wait a minute, that's racist. You can't use a black woman as a prop. And all of a sudden, Representative Meadows was the aggrieved party. He demanded that her remarks be stricken, and she apologized, and she did apologize. Nobody apologized to her. John Lewis stood up for those young women of color, and he said, you know what? I applaud them. They're making good trouble, he said. They're making necessary trouble. He said, you have to bear witness. You got to bear witness to the truth. And the next thing John Lewis did is he bore witness to the truth when there were certain tweets that said that those very same representatives need to go back to where they came from. John Lewis spoke out and he said, I know racism when I hear it. I know racism when I feel it. And at the highest levels of our government, there is no room for racism. That's John Lewis. That's the character of the man who at 80 years old, with all that he has on his plate, is still speaking out and standing up. So we are not only honoring a lifetime of dedication and action on social justice, we are celebrating a great man because he continues to stand up and speak out at 80 years old in a way that is an example to us all. So let's all in this room heed his example, please, and make good trouble every day. Don't get angry, get active. And now let's hear from our inspiration, Congressman John Robert Lewis.
Good evening. I regret very much that I cannot be with you, the members of the American Bar Association. But I come to say to you, thank you so much. I'm deeply honored to be receiving the Thurgood Marshall Award. So many unbelievable members of the bar who received this award in the past. I'm not a lawyer, but I know a little something about the law. You know, during the 60s, after growing up in rural Alabama and getting involved in the civil rights movement, I came in contact with many lawyers, including Justice Marshall. There was many lawyers when we got arrested and went to jail, when we were beaten and left bloody. They came to our rescue. They defended us and got us out of jail on many occasions. But growing up there, as a little child, I remember seeing the signs that said white men, colored men, white women, white waiting, colored waiting. And I've asked my mother, my father, my grandparents, and great-grandparents why. They would say, that's the way it is. Don't get in the way, don't get in trouble. But in 1955, 15 years old, I heard of Rosa Parks. I heard of Martin Luther King Jr., and I was inspired to get in trouble, what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. And I've been getting in trouble ever since. As a student in school, many of us as black and white college students participated in the sit-ins. We would be sitting in an orderly, peaceful, nonviolent fashion, and someone would come up and spit on us, or put lighted cigarettes out in our hair or down our backs. But we would talk the way of peace, the way of love. We would talk the philosophy and the discipline of nonviolence. And when we would be arrested and taken to jail, it was the lawyers that pleaded our cases. I was inspired never to give up, never to give in, never to become bitter. And so I want to thank each and every one of you as members of the bar for standing up, for speaking out, for helping to redeem the soul of America. We need the law to be on the side of the people. We need members of the bar more than ever before to find a way to get in the way and to get in what I call good trouble, necessary trouble. During the 60s, I was arrested and jailed 40 times. And since I've been in Congress, another 5 times. And I'm probably going to get arrested and go to jail again. My philosophy is very simple. When you see something is not right, not fair, not just, you have to assess something. You have to do something. We need your leadership. We need your vision. We need your dedication now more than ever before to help save our country, to help save democracy, and continue to build what Dr. King and many of us call the beloved community, to help redeem the soul of America. We must never give up. We must never, ever give in. We must keep the faith, and we must keep our eyes on the prize. We were beaten. We were jailed for attempting to register to vote, for attempting to march from Selma to Montgomery. But our effort led to the passage of the Voting Rights Act of 1965. We need the help of lawyers and special members of the American Bar Association to defend the rights of all of our people. And it doesn't matter whether we're black or white, Latino, Asian American, or Native American. We're one people, we're one family. We all live in the same house, not just the American house, but the world house. As Dr. King said on many occasions, we must learn to live together as brothers and sisters. If not, we will perish as fools. I thank you for all that you have done and will continue to do to make our country a better place for all of our citizens. Thank you so much for this award, and I wish each and every one of you well. Good night.
I've seen that video several times. It still gets to me. That's a hard act to follow, even on video. But we have a person here who, if anybody's capable of doing it, she is. You know, you are in for a rare emotional, musical, spiritual treat. I was trying to conjure a way to suitably introduce the singular and sublime voice you're about to hear, a voice that sanctifies everything she sings with the same spirit and soulfulness that John Lewis has brought to 60 years of civil rights work. And then I realized, especially when he's not here, I should let John Lewis's own words introduce her. So that's what I'm going to do. I'm going to quote from his memoir. This is John Lewis speaking. There were no hymn books in either church I attended as a child, no piano, no organ, but there was music. Music richer and fuller and sweeter than any I've ever heard since. I'm talking about pure singing. The sound of voices fueled by the Spirit, people keeping rhythm with a beat they heard in their hearts, singing songs that came straight from their souls with words they felt in every bone of their body. Young and old, struggling with poverty and doing their best, found joy and meaning in the midst of hardship and pain. That captures both the spirit and the inspiration of Rhiannon Giddens, who you are about to hear from, an artist who otherwise, as far as I can tell, defies description. And I mean that only in the most complimentary way. In fact, I think probably the most distinguishing characteristic about Rhiannon is that she is undefinable. She's a polymath. She's a Renaissance artist and human being. But a couple things can be said. The voice is glorious. I mean, with an opera singer's training infused with the Southern spirit that she got growing up in Greensboro, North Carolina, enhanced by a beautifully eclectic musical sensibility. And then her work, reclaiming African American musical history and exploring the amazing breadth of the diaspora and beyond, is just remarkable. You know, just as John Lewis has been a peaceful warrior against racial oppression, Rhiannon Giddens has been a songful warrior against the kind of pathology of musical appropriation that we've had historically. For me, it's almost enough to know that her lodestar is the fierce and luminous Nina Simone. But Rhiannon is all her own. She has a dazzling range from blues to bluegrass to Celtic to operatic soprano. She's got a MacArthur Genius Grant. She makes me feel so inadequate. She's got 2 Grammy Awards. She has a role on the TV program Nashville. She's in the North Carolina Music Hall of Fame. I could go on and on. But it's really her work as much as her talent that shines. She made a career out of revitalizing music, reflecting the African American experience, digging into the past to illuminate the present. And she's shown the pervasive influence of African traditions on what we think of as American music, across the spectrum. I mean, across the spectrum, in a way that completely blows up all the cultural narratives that are misunderstood. She schools herself in past racial atrocities so she can bring them to life through music. She wrote an album to tell the stories of racial violence in American history. She has been working on a theatrical treatment of the Wilmington insurrection in the late 1800s. There was a post-Reconstruction massacre by the Klan of white and black folks in North Carolina that came together to try to govern their city in a Reconstruction kind of way. And now she's working on an opera based on the autobiography of an African Muslim slave stolen to Charleston in I think 1807, which is the only account of a slave written in Arabic in history. Dr. King talked about the arc of the moral universe and bending it towards justice, which John Lewis has spent his career doing. America's cultural memory is also warped by centuries of racism. And Rhiannon has been bending the arc of the musical universe back towards justice, song by song, heart by heart. So here is Rhiannon Giddens to enter your heart.
didn't know his name. I didn't know his name. I don't know where he's gone. 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 He had a long chain on. 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 He killed another man. He killed another man. He killed another man. He killed another man. I'm gonna walk your log. I'm gonna walk your log down by the waterfall. I'm gonna walk your log. Another man done gone. Another man done gone. Gone from the county farm. Another man done gone. Another man done gone. Another man done gone. Thank you. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Yes, this is a very hard video to follow. This is so much a part of the work that I do. And it's the generation, Congressman John Lewis's generation, all of the work that generation and everyone who's followed that is what allowed me, mixed race child born 3 years after Loving in North Carolina at a time where it was still not cool. Well, my sister was born 3 years after Loving. I was a little bit later. But to grow up in a world that